Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Shant Epremian, as Josh mentioned. I come to you from Florida. I was actually born and raised in Montreal. I won't bore you with the details of my credentials, but we have a team of real estate professionals in Florida. We serve all of Florida. I'm perfectly bilingual. J'ai fait mes études en français, donc si vous avez des questions en français, ça va me faire plaisir d'y répondre. J'ai habité à Montréal et à Toronto pendant plus que 25 ans avant de déménager en Floride. Mais ce matin, on est ici pour vous parler. We're going to talk about Florida real estate this morning, and we're going to focus on the southeast region. Now, although we do sell in the entire state of Florida, I'd like to draw your attention to the southeast region because many Canadians are buying in this area because of convenience, easy access through 15 flights a day direct, West Palm Beach Airport, Fort Lauderdale, Miami Airport. It's also the center for cruise ships. You have Fort Lauderdale Gateway, Miami Gateway. Several Vegas-style casinos coming to the area, professional sporting events, so there's really fun for every lifestyle. What's happened in the Florida real estate market? Obviously, you've heard the news, the housing crash, the banking collapse. Prices are down since 2008 at the peak of the market, but what's really interesting as an investor or a second home buyer is that rents are actually up, which we'll talk about. And of course, as Canadians, we know that dollar is still strong. It has taken a dip in the last couple of weeks, a little bit of a roller coaster. But historically, if we look at the last 50 years, the Canadian dollar is still very, very strong compared to 1980, 85, where we were paying $1.30, $1.40, $1.50, even in the late 90s to change our Canadian dollar to the US greenback. And of course, financing is available for your purchases as well as your investments. So it could be also very easily done. And we're seeing stronger demand from baby boomers buying in Florida. So let's take a look closely at housing prices. Just to give you examples, in 2007, at the peak of the market, a single family, a median blended price of a single family home, $268,000, and a condo, $232,000. That's at the peak in 2007. That's taking into account the entire state of Florida. If we compare that with 2011, $133,000 for a single family home. Now, I want to tell you, I'm from the West Island, and I'd like to ask you what you could buy here in Montreal, on the island, off the island, for $133,000. Not even a lot. And obviously, this depends on location. There's a number of factors which we'll get into, but needless to say, there has been a very, very sharp decline in prices. Condominium, $97,000. Okay, so prices are down. Again, depending on the area, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Rents are up. Here's what's very interesting. We'll get into short sales, foreclosures, distressed properties, differences between them. But the reason that rents are up is because people can't necessarily afford to get financing. They have destroyed their credit because of second chance mortgages, the subprime mortgages, and now they still have to live somewhere. So they're renting. So there's very, very, very strong demand for rentals, which is very interesting for you guys as a Canadian investor, whether it's for a second home or strictly an investment product. Rents are actually up year over year, 16.7% in the southeast region. So on average, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, $1,700 a month. If you compare that with the US average, $1,430, and certainly Phoenix, $1,050. So prices sharply down, rents are up, a great opportunity for investments. Who's buying? People of all ages. Certainly one of the things that drew me to Florida was the investment opportunity. I started as a real estate investor before I got licensed as a broker. And baby boomers. Over the next 10 years, it's said that 76 million baby boomers and about 21% of those are expected to move to Florida. So huge demand in properties in Florida. If you have any questions as we go along, please don't hesitate. We have a very small group. The information session is really to educate you guys, demystify some terms, so please don't hesitate to ask. I'd like to touch on a few subjects which are very well presented in the media. People are talking about it. There's a big hype regarding distressed property, short sales, foreclosures, REO. What are they? Are they good deals? So let's talk about definitions. So what is a short sale? A short sale, essentially, I'll give you an example. In 2007, at the height of the market, Mr. and Mrs. Smith bought a house for $300,000. Because of irresponsible lending practices, they actually financed 110% of their purchase. So $330,000 loan, the house is $300,000. Now, people were betting that the market was going to continue going up, going up, going up. That's why people kept buying, selling, making $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a quarter. until one day it came to a halt. 3 years later, the Smith family needs to sell their house. There's a death in the family, there's a divorce, they have to relocate for a job, something happens, the interest on their mortgage adjusted, they can't make their payments anymore. The house is worth $140,000. The shortfall between what we could sell the house today and what's owed to the bank, whether it's first mortgage, second mortgage, is what constitutes the short sale. People always associate a short sale with a good deal, but in actual fact, it is a good deal and not, because there's nothing really short about a short sale. It actually takes a very, very long time, and it's an investment instrument that could take up to 18 to 24 months to purchase. What happens is you have multiple parties that are involved. So you have yourself, the buyer, the bank, and it could be financial institution 1, financial institution 2, as well as the seller. A few things you have to ask yourselves. Is the seller even qualified to do a short sale? Are they insolvent? Now you might be asking yourself, well, why do I care about this? Well, if they're not qualified to do a short sale, you may be putting an offer and proceeding in contract on a property that really, it's never going to get approved as a short sale. There are thousands and thousands of real estate agents in Florida, and there are thousands of properties available. They advertise as short sales when they're not always short sales, so you have to be really, really careful what you're getting yourself into, because oftentimes you put a deposit on something and it drags and drags and drags when you really could have bought something else as good, if not better of a deal, without the aggravation and the headaches. So that's a short sale. Now let's talk about a foreclosure. Foreclosure is when the tenants or the owners have been evicted from the property. They haven't paid, the bank forecloses. Now you're dealing with buyer and bank. Normally one bank. That's it. The banks are not in the business of owning real estate. The banks want to get rid of the property. It's a liability on their books. They don't want it. So what they do is they give it to brokers, such as ourselves, and we sell it directly to the consumer. Typically, the price that is set by the bank is the price they're going to take, and typically on bank-owned properties, they're set very low and there are multiple offers on the properties. The advantage of the foreclosure or the real estate-owned REO, all of these things mean the same thing, is that the transaction is done quickly. However, you have to keep in mind there are some limitations in terms of repairs needing to be done on the property. If you don't mind doing a little bit of work, there are good opportunities. Now, why a little bit of work? Well, think of it. The people that were in the property previously left with the shirt on their backs. That's it. They just left. They were evicted. They were forced out of their houses. So they basically take with them tables, chairs, granite countertops, wood floors, marble floors, anything they could take with them. They have nothing. They're going away with absolutely nothing. They lost money. They lost their deposit. They lost their credit. So they're going to take just as much as they can. So as a foreclosure, yes, you're getting a good deal. You have to be mindful of what the repairs are going to be to bring it up to living conditions. And oftentimes it's still a good deal, but what I want to draw your attention to is that you may be able to get a just as good of a deal, if not a better deal, with an estate sale, a death, divorce, someone that needs to sell very quickly, that doesn't have these sort of red flags like a short sale and a foreclosure. So as a second home buyer, as an investor, just be mindful of these types of investment instruments when you're purchasing the property. You need to ask the right questions before getting yourself involved into a contract that's something that could take a lot of time. So you've purchased a property, or you're thinking of purchasing a property for an investment. You're probably wondering, how do I manage it from 3,000 kilometers away in Montreal? Well, that's one of the services that our company offers, is property management. And whether you work with us or another firm, it's important to ask yourselves a few questions. Number one, who's going to screen the tenants? Do they have a good background? Who's going to do the criminal background? Who's going to make sure that we get first, last security deposit? Who's going to collect the rent? Who's going to give you financial reporting? Who will be there if the AC goes out in the middle of the night? Who will be there if there's a leak with a hot water tank? These are all important questions to ask yourselves. Property management fees range between 8 and 15%, depending on the complexity, depending on the size of the property, but it's definitely something that would give you peace of mind if you're buying as an investment, so that the company you're dealing with offers you a turnkey solution. So it's really important to ask these questions. Also, how's the contract written? You want to make sure that the contract is written that it benefits you, the landlord, and not necessarily the tenant. And laws in Florida are such that it really benefits more the landlord than the tenant, as opposed to the way they are in Quebec. Steps for purchase. Really important, we start with number one, initial consultation. sit down with ourselves, have an initial consultation, really understand your needs, objectives. What are you looking to do? Is it strictly for an investment? Are you going to be looking to rent it? Or is it going to be a little bit of both, a hybrid? What types of budget do you want to set for this? Obviously, arrange financing. We do have partners that we work with, such as the Laurentian Bank, the Royal Bank of Canada, who offer financing for U.S. properties. Then you need to decide what type of property you're going to be buying. Is it going to be a condo? Is it going to be a townhouse? Is it going to be a single family house? Are we going into a gated community, non-gated community? The reasons why? What does it include? All of these things. And we identify a property that we want to place an offer. And of course, after the offer is negotiated, we would proceed to a home inspection. We always recommend a home inspection. I think it's very important. And then it's our responsibility to work with you to make sure you have clear title to buying a property. You don't want to have any clouds on your title. You want to make sure there's no latent defects on it. And then we would fund and close a transaction. And then, of course, there are numerous ways of owning the property when we're taking title, which Mr. Moraitis will talk about, which would benefit you buying it a certain way versus another way, which could have different tax consequences. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Then, of course, we could renovate, provide a tenant for you, and property manage the property. So really offer a turnkey solution. So far, so good. Any questions? Okay. So condo associations. Yes, sir.
Could you just give us an example when you made a statement that the Florida laws are more towards the landlord and the tenant?
So as an example, there's no law that says that I cannot increase my rent 50% year over year if I wanted to. There's no law that says that if I don't want to renew the lease with this person, I don't have to. There's not a certain standard way of writing a lease. There's a suggested recommended way, but it's not like a standardized form that people use. They could draw up their own lease, and if they wanted to collect all the rent up front, for instance, we have clients that really want to discourage people paying late, so they'll put a penalty like $100 a day for late rent. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, whatever's written black and white, you could absolutely do that. Yes, sir.
In terms of foreclosure, I think the laws are different in different jurisdictions, but let's just say that I have a $250,000 mortgage and I know I can only get $150,000 for the house, so I walk away.
Yes.
Okay? Now, does that mean that the bank is not going to ask me for the $100,000 differential, or will they hound me for the rest of my life?
That's a really good question. That's what's called a personal promissory note, and that depends on the situation. So it depends on the seller, and there's another reason why the short sale could take a lot of time. To your point, $250,000 purchase, you put an offer for $150,000, negotiate the short sale with the bank. Let's say it's Citibank, Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. 6, 8, 12 months later, they go to the seller and say, well, Mr. Seller, the bank's going to take a $100,000 hit, but we're going to come after you for $25,000 personally, a personal promissory note over the next 5 years. If the seller doesn't sign off on that, guess what? There's not going to be a short sale. It's just going to drag, and eventually it'll be foreclosed. So certain situations, yes. Certain situations, no. There isn't really a consistent way of doing it. It depends on the person's situation. A short sale is really determined on case-by-case basis. What is the person's hardship? Is it a true hardship, or is it some makeshift, we shifted money around to make believe to the bank that we have no money? And there's a lot of that. South Florida is the fraud capital of the world. There's a lot of people that will take money from one end, put it in the other, send it offshore, onshore. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen. So the bank gets a little bit susceptible, and they trace, they look at your lifestyle, they see, well, wow, you all of a sudden you liquidated everything, there's nothing left, you mean you can't pay me anything? You know what, we're going to put a promissory note, we're going to come after you, there's going to be tax consequences. So it's very different case by case. That's why I don't like to recommend short sales to my clients. Personally, you could get great deals not having a short sale, not going through that aggravation. It's just not worth it. Either wait till it forecloses or buy something as an estate sale or a divorce case or some regular sale, keeping in mind those people who are selling know that the short sales are happening, know that the foreclosures are happening. If someone is on the market today selling their property, they know they're competing against that. They're going to price their house or their property accordingly. So you don't have to worry about that. It's not like you're getting a bad deal if you don't buy distressed property. There's this myth that if I don't buy a short sale or if I don't buy a foreclosure, I'm not getting a deal. It's not true. It's certainly not true. Okay, condo associations. As an example, we have 3 towers here, A, B, C. one has condo fees more than the other, one has different services. What does they cover? You know, condos fees range from $250 to $2,500, and it really depends what the building is offering you. Generally speaking, certain things that you need to be aware of when you're purchasing a condo is what's the financial stability of the condo? Do they have reserves? What happens is in condominiums is there's a board of directors that's elected by the residents who then hire a property management company to take care of the day-to-day operations, landscaping, maintenance, all sorts of things. But who is managing your condo? Who is managing the financials of the condo? These are questions you want to ask yourselves at the beginning. Are there a high rate of delinquencies? That's what would make the difference between similar condos, one having condo fees reasonably priced and others having very, very high condo fees, or what we call special assessments. If the condo is not well managed, what happens is what may seem to be a good deal because you're purchasing it at a few $1,000s less than the other condo for the same view, same height, may not be a good deal in the long run because you're going to have special assessments. Like a house, you have to maintain a condo. There's concrete restoration, there's roofs, there's day-to-day landscaping, all of this. So it's important to just do your due diligence, and we certainly will do all of that for you to make sure you're buying in a financially sound place. There are some condos that are great opportunities. They look really great. You look at them, wow, that's a great deal. But really, do you really want to own there? Probably not. For special assessment reasons, financial stability, all of these types of reasons. Condo, yes, sir.
Divided or undivided co-ownerships?
Divided.
Okay, so
yes.
As we see here,
correct. Yes.
Usually.
Condo fee, yes, sir.
Is the condo association obliged to give you a history of previous assessments?
Yes, they are. Yes. I don't know what the statute is. I'm not an attorney, but there is a certain number of years that they have to, by law, go back. Yes, sir. Typically, though, to your point, there's a history. Like, a building will not have concrete restoration or windows done or roof done every 5 years. Like typically there's a schedule, like every 25 years is roof, every 40 years is concrete restoration, every 7 years is painting, every 5 years is paving. So knowing that going into it, certain buildings that have everything done, the assessments have been paid, you know that for the next 20 years you're fine. You know they have reserves for painting, they have set aside those funds. So these are things that you could quickly at a glance look at and be comfortable with your purchase. So needless to say, take a look at what the condo association includes. You know, does it include cable? Does it include virtual golf, water, internet? All of these things may play a difference in what you're paying monthly for your fees. Insurance. We're real estate brokers, not insurance professionals, but we just want to touch on this subject really briefly just to let you know there's 4 types of insurance in Florida. Wind insurance for hurricane, flood insurance, which is rising water, personal coverage, i.e. personal contents, chairs, tables, and general liability. Of course, as you know, the U.S. is a very litigious society. As Canadians, we don't really sue for certain things like hot coffee or, slips and falls, but the U.S. they do. So you want to make sure that you have general liability. It's just a small point. It's not a lot of money to have, and it's just something that covers you. Someone comes to your house, has a little bit too much to drink, or someone slips and falls, delivering the mail to you, UPS. You have general liability to cover you, and that's it, right? It's nothing that's major, earth-shattering, but it's just important to have these types of insurance when you're purchasing a property. How to analyze an investment. In your portfolio, you have a sheet where we go over, and I won't spend too much time on this going into detail, but we talked about analyzing your risks, your objectives. Here we take an example of a property which was purchased by one of our clients for $160,000 in Hollywood, Florida. We're renting it for $1,750 a month, so the gross annual rent is $21,000. We take a look at taxes, insurance, property management here is at 10%. Pool is paid by the tenant in this case. Lawn service is paid by the owner. That's 100% negotiable how you do it. But this sort of gives you an idea of what to expect in terms of costs. Sometimes I get the question, are taxes more for a foreigner? Like Canadians, do we pay more taxes? And the answer is no. Everybody pays the same taxes, except if in the US it's your primary residence. I have a few investment properties and I have one primary residence. I will get a credit of about $1,000 a year off my primary residence, which is the equivalent of about $50,000 in exemption for my primary residence. But whether you're buying from Canada or from Boston or from Japan, it doesn't make a difference. You're not extra taxed for personal property tax. So we go through an exercise here of your expenses. Your net operating income gives you a cash-on-cash return of about 8.5%. And you could expect returns right now for property anywhere between 7 and 12%, depending on the area, depending on the purchase price, depending on the investment instrument. So what's really important is in your contract for lease, who's paying for what. Sometimes things you don't think about, right? The pool, the lawn, all of these things could be negotiated. And you want to make sure that the numbers make sense when you're analyzing the investment. Don't look at the appreciation. I always like to tell customers, our clients think of, well, how much is it going to be worth? That should be the bonus. Right now, we're at such a low prices that prices inevitably are going to go up. Right now, you should look at what's your return on day one, how much money am I getting, what's my cash-on-cash return, what's my capitalization rate right now. Eventually, yes, the property will appreciate depending on the location that you buy. So similarly to Montreal, if you're buying close to downtown or in Westmount, Nuns Island, on the island, you're closer to the epicenter of a downtown metropolis. In Florida, the contrast or the example is kind of like the ocean. So you have, the closer you get to the ocean, the more expensive it gets, the less prices have come down, people were in better financial shape, prices are not as hard hit. There's still good opportunities, but if you want something 70% off of what it was 3 years ago, you'd have to go 20 miles, 30 miles inland to find that. Just a few examples. Typical house in Boca Raton, average price in the area is $272,000. This house is available for $175,000, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,300 square feet. Miramar, just a little bit south and west, average price in the area $194,200. This example is $287,500 because it's fully renovated, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. But again, you could see compared to Montreal, these prices are very, very, very reasonable. This condominium, again, this is $400,000. Average price in the area in Aventura is $200,000. Depends on your view, depends on your exposure, depends on the height, obstructed, unobstructed view, renovations in the condominium. Here's another example in Aventura, $1.2 million. This is 4,000 square feet. Still some very, very good discounts from the height of the market. Miami Beach, $250,000. This example is $265,000, 1-bedroom, 1-bath. We do also have some commercial opportunities, triple net leases with whether it's a Walgreens, a multi-unit, 8-unit, 10-unit, 12-unit, anything that's 4+ in residential real estate constitutes multi-unit, commercial real estate. So we do have those available as well. I just want to end, and I'll take your questions, on real estate. I don't believe you should put all your eggs in the same basket, but it's certainly something that's worthwhile considering given what the returns that you're getting these days at the bank. It's something that you could leverage, and it's something that you could pass on to your kids and grandchildren. It certainly has generational wealth. And here's our contact information. We have a website, which is investinflorida.ca. We have a toll-free 800 number, which is 888-435-2669, and I would be happy to take any questions or stay after the presentation to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, I'm here to talk more the boring stuff. And there's, I guess, 4 things which I need you to remember, and then you can go home. My name, Nick Moraitis, and Fuller Landau. Actually, no, there's really 4 things. When buying property in the U.S., you have now entered into the U.S. tax system. You could potentially be a taxpayer. You have obligations vis-a-vis the U.S. and the IRS. The second thing is you're still Canadian, which means you're still responsible to Canada for the same activity in the U.S., which basically means there's both governments are looking at what you're doing there. The third thing is, and we got examples, there's no single one cookie-cutter way to purchase any property in Florida, whether it's a condo, a house, a revenue property. It isn't a single way. We look at a lot of different factors, and sometimes it's how wealthy you are, sometimes it's how expensive of a place you're buying, and sometimes it's how joyful are you when you get an invoice from your accountant and your lawyer to set up your structures. And that's a lot of the factors that we look at. And the fourth and last thing is, while you're in Florida or anywhere else in the States and you're on the beach and you're talking to your neighbors and your U.S. friends start talking to you about all the fantastic stuff that they're doing, their LLCs, their family limited partnerships, their gifting strategies, do not listen. That is U.S. advice, which can get you into an enormous amount of trouble you trying to follow that, because our Canadian system is completely different. And with that, you can leave. But, well, I'll continue on. I'm supposed to stand here? Yeah. This is some of the stuff we're going to look at when we're looking, you're buying property in Florida. This is usually some of the stuff that we start looking at. We're looking at U.S. estate tax, which I'll talk about a little bit, because that's been a lot of the driving as to why we create structures. We're looking to avoid double tax because there's two governments looking at the same transaction, especially if you're selling or you're renting. We're looking at where's the money coming from to finance the acquisition. Is it personal funds? Is it mortgages? Is it corporate money that you're looking to use? The cost of setting all this up, we live setting up structures, so obviously if you're very happy paying our bills, then fine, we can go ahead on that. And then there's the tax reporting, because sometimes we set up gorgeous structures and it'll cost you just as much every year to just tell all the government what you're doing. So that's stuff that we have to watch. Who can own it? Well, this is typically the alternatives we're looking at, personal ownership, and then there's a whole bunch of varieties of that. We can throw it into a Canadian trust. We can throw it into a Canadian limited partnership, a corporate or corporations, whether Canadian or U.S. or some combination. And there's other much more luxurious methods, but that's usually what we're looking to do. And when you're talking to an advisor, that's going through his head. He's just running through the list and saying, okay, what's the pros and cons of each one, and where would you like to fit into? So before we get into the actual ownership, you got to know a little bit about U.S. estate tax. On death, if you're an American, whatever you are worth is subject to U.S. estate tax. So Warren Buffett, who's worth several billion, if he passes away, if he passes away this year and next, he'll lose about 35% of his estate, even if it's sitting in cash. If he waits another 3 years to pass away, he might be losing 55% of his estate because the tax laws change. So for him to give away half or 3/4 of his estate as a donation to a foundation, to him it's no big deal, because he'll lose half of it anyway. Canadians who pass away and own property in the U.S., and that property could be real estate, that property could also be shares of U.S. corporations that you hold in your investment portfolio in your RRSPs, are subject to this U.S. estate tax. And it doesn't matter if you had... The same percentages. We'll get to. So if I had, the example I give is I have $500,000 of cash sitting in my bank account. I go, Shant sells me a condo. I buy it for $500,000. I'm so joyful I have a heart attack. I'm now subject to U.S. estate tax because I own U.S. real estate that I just bought. Okay, now that's what's happening. And that's why all these, well, how are we going to own it? And this goes back to that. We also include furniture, cars, etc. I have a file right now where the deceased had a very nice Mercedes-Benz plated in Florida that is now subject to U.S. estate taxes. His entire estate qualified for the tax. And I'm sitting there, we're getting prices for, you want to buy a used Mercedes-Benz? How does it work? An American, if he passes away this year and next year, gets an exemption of $5 million. So if you die and you're worth $5 million with insurance, there's no U.S. estate tax today. If you have the misfortune of living into 2013 and then pass away, and the law doesn't change, that exemption falls to $1 million. Okay, and that's why there's a concern, and that's why sometimes when we're doing our planning, technically $5 million is just a certain number of people who are going to be worth $5 million on death. At 1 million, there's a whole bunch more. So how do we plan? And what you may not need it today, but what about in 2013 would you need it? The rates as well change. Today, the top maximum rate, which I think hits at several hundreds of thousands of dollars of value, is 35%. In 2013, it's scheduled to go to 55%.
Just very quickly, the U.S. will evaluate your worth in American or Canadian American?
It's American dollars.
Only, no, I mean, what you're worth in insurance here, your houses here, all your net worth here and there?
Well, we're getting there. It's a good question, because the example. Actually, you know what's that's a great question. You know what? We know what's a great question. I have a slide that gets into that, though. But it does. It is exactly that. Now, the one thing we do need to know is for all aliens, because we're aliens, if we're not living in the States, the minimum is $60,000 of assets in the U.S. when we start being reportable to the U.S. So even if you do not have a dime to pay because of the numbers and the exemptions, etc. If the value of your assets in the U.S., that means your U.S. real estate, your U.S. shares, your U.S. cars, your U.S. furniture, is more than $60,000, your estate will have to file a tax return to the U.S. to tell them about it but not pay anything. Otherwise, there's an automatic lien, I understand, from the IRS. So how does this work? Well, here's some numbers, which goes to what you're doing. An American gets this $5 million exemptions. Canadians don't get that. The Canadians, under our tax treaty, and we're one of the few, I think, has a favorable treatment, get a percentage of that $5 million. Or in 2013, we will get a percentage of that million. And what's that percentage? That's when they start looking, what are you worth dead worldwide? In this example, I'm worth $8 million, I wish. What is in the U.S.? What of this $8 million is sitting in the U.S.? Again, shares, furniture, it's $1 million, so 1/8. This $1,730,000 is, if an American died being worth $5 million, the $1,730,000 is what he would have owed in tax had it not been for the exemption. So a deceased American worth $5 million, his estate tax is $1,730,000. But because there's an exemption, that's the credit, if you want to say. We don't have to pay that $1,700,000. So what it means is that as a Canadian, I get 1/8 of that $1,700,000 as my exemption for the U.S. And so it's worth $216,000 of taxes. So today, if I died owning $1 million in the U.S., my tax bill on $1 million is $330,000. But I get back that $216,000 as my exemption. I owe $114,000. Now, I'm worth $1 million. I owe $114,000. You may say, hey, the kids are going to have to do without the $115,000. In 2 years from now, however, that $1,730,000 I think falls to a couple $100,000 here. So my $216,000 falls to $40,000 or $50,000. This $330,000 could be going up to $400,000 or $500,000. Now I owe $500,000 should I only be dying after 2013 and they don't change the law. Now the clock starts going and saying, well, wait a sec, I could do without the extra 114, but if I'm losing $500,000, and we're the type of personalities, most of these people who did earn $8 million are the type of personalities, they want to keep their wealth, not necessarily give it off to the government. Now we start looking into planning. So this is the U.S. estate tax, and this is why we get all hot and bothered when we're talking about buying into the U.S., and this is one of the drivers. The other thing, and this has nothing to do with who owns it, could be a company, could be a trust, could be yourself. There's nothing to do with U.S. estate tax, but I have to assume that once you, I have to be in the camera too, once you now own a property in the States, chances are you'll probably be visiting it more than you were in the past. Well, you have to be careful how many times you visit, because after a while the IRS starts noticing and says, hey, wait a sec. If you're here for more than 183 days in a year, you are a U.S. tax resident. So where's your tax forms and where's your taxes? If you also meet something called the substantial presence test, and this is the one we worry about, because this one everybody can count the 183 days. And for all of you who are writing, if you leave us your business cards, we're more than happy to, actually we'll be very, very happy to send you our stuff. The substantial presence test is a mechanical calculation. They look at the last 3 years based on this formula, and if they count the number of days based on this formula, so this is 2011, so take all the days I'm in the U.S. in 2011, a third of the days I was in the U.S. in 2010, and a sixth of the days that I was in the U.S. in 2009, and add it up, and if that is more than 183 days, I'm considered to be a U.S. tax resident. Now, before we get too concerned, there is relief under our tax treaty, because Canada is not going to give you up as a taxpayer. And under our treaty, it says, well, listen, if we both consider you resident, well, there's a tiebreaker rule. Someone's got to win, and usually Canada will win because your life is here. So you would not have to pay. But what it does mean is that someone's expecting a form in the IRS that tells them that you do meet this test, but I'm a Canadian. And if without it, the U.S. could deny your relief under the treaty and go back and say, please pay tax in the States. So it's more of a reporting issue. So some accountant is going to get happy because he's going to be billing you. Okay, now we're getting into the ownership. The simplest ownership is personal. I go down there. My house here is it's actually my wife's name, but it could be my name too. I could go down to Florida and buy a house in my name, and that's that. It's simple. It's right. It's easy. We show up, we sign, and we go home. It's simple, least costly. The big benefit also, the U.S. has a special low tax rate, flat 15% on long-term capital gains, means if I held something for more than a year. There's no special exemptions for a Canadian with their U.S. Home. It's not, you can't get the U.S. House exemption that an American can get. So if they start talking to you about the $250,000 they can get an exemption, you're not going to do you any good. But if I pass away, I could be subject to U.S. estate tax. Obviously, if I'm not worth $5 million, I may not worry about it. But if I'm worth more than $1 million, I have to, because in 2013 the rules change. And hopefully, if Shant's telling me what's going to happen, my house could double in 10 years, which is why we're even interested in this. The other thing is probate on death. I pass away, that's great. I need to go get my will, and quite a few, maybe not in this room, but in quite a few presentations we give, your will is notarized in French, in Quebec, which is a fantastic will. Unfortunately, notary means nothing in Florida, and French means even less. So you got to now convert it into English, go in court, get it probated, which is all the stuff that we're trying to avoid. Go down to Florida and try to get it approved there. And that probate process could cost. And I used to shrug off on that. So okay, so you're going to pay, until I ran into a file where it took us, because unfortunately it was handled by a U.S. lawyer who did not understand the nuances very well, went in front of a judge in Borough Country. You see, you remembered. Went in front of a judge who unfortunately looked at the family name, and it wasn't Smith or Roy, it was some other name, and said, who are these people? I don't like it. I want the guarantees. I want a cautionnement in French, which is an insurance bond. It took us 3 years to go from the deceased to his widow, and 2008 came in the middle. We couldn't sell it. We couldn't mortgage it. We couldn't do anything with it. So that never happened to me before, and I used to run around here, and we get into 2 law firms in the States to finally deal with it, and it cost a couple, 15, 20 grand in legal fees just to do the switch of a $500,000 condo that's worth $300 today. Did I scare you?
Yeah.
Okay, how do we get some of the stuff, because personal ownership is a viable alternative. So what do we do? You can own it, tenants in common. I and my wife own 50-50. I die, I'm only looking at 50% of the condo being part of my wealth. And as tenants in common means it doesn't automatically go to her. If she passes away, she has the 50%. So that might be, that's something that would reduce my estate tax, does nothing for probate. But it does look towards reducing my estate tax. Joint with survivorship simply says I die, it automatically goes to her. It's an automatic. But that means I have 100% of the value of the house on my name, and I could be subject to U.S. estate tax. So we look at this, and this is popular. It's relatively easy to do. If we're doing this, though, contrary to Canada, where I can put my wife on the title that I paid, or actually it was the other way around, I think, in the U.S. you need to prove who paid. So if I'm putting wife and I here, she better be cutting a check for her 50%. Otherwise, the IRS don't buy it. It's not the legal form. It's what actually happened. The thing about the U.S. is once you own something 50-50, what usually or sometimes can happen, or is it usual? Usual? Yeah. There's something called valuation discounts. If I own a $500,000 condo and I'm maybe subject to U.S. estate tax, by owning it 50-50, what is the value of 50% of a condo? If I wanted to sell it to you, you're going to pay $250? Probably not, because you got to live with my wife. You're gonna, but it's a good thing. But you may only want to pay $200 or $175, and the U.S. accepts that if you own only a part of something, that there will be a discount. Well, the minute you're doing these discounts and you're talking about a 35-55% tax rate on U.S. estate tax, it starts to add up. And that becomes family limited partnerships and holding business interests, or I understand even with real estate. It becomes a big issue in the States when I'm talking to the estate guys there, because you're talking 20-25% off millions of dollars of value. Gifting, just to know one thing, I don't want to get into gifting is a special tax on gifting in the U.S., contrary to the Canadian system. So if I gift $100,000 to you, I owe the IRS money. Whereas that's not to say, so they may be talking to you about gifting issues. If someone says you should gift the property to your wife, well, that's fine, but I got gifting issues, and we're also into other Canadian tax issues there. So that's personal. What else on personal? You mentioned financing. A non-recourse mortgage is a mortgage where there's no personal guarantee. So all the bank has is your house. If they sell your house, they can't come after you for any difference. Non-recourse mortgages, from the state purposes, bless you, reduces your value again. So if I have a $500,000 home or $1 million home, and I get a $400,000 mortgage, for purposes of how rich I am and how much property, they're only looking at the $600,000. So again, that mortgage is saving me my 35 or 55% tax rate that I won't have to pay. And this is something we do consider, except since the financial issues have occurred, people have been telling me it's a little harder to get, or they're not going to get the 70 or 80% they used to get. They're getting 50% of the value. There are Canadian banks down there. Laurentian isn't there yet, huh? You're getting there. I think HSBC is there, BMO is there, I heard RBC is there, except they're selling this Intura. So there are some Canadian banks there who could possibly, and this is a viable alternative. This is something we do look at. Now, Shant, what you didn't mention is, Shant, because Shant was talking to me a lot about this, sometimes for purchasing, it's nice to walk in with a valise of cash and paying it cash there because you can get the deal.
Get a better price, cash is king.
That's right. And what then the suggestion is, well, then go get your non-recourse afterwards, take the money, reinvest it wherever it was that you were invested in, and get to write off the mortgage here for Canada. So it's a planning technique as well. Okay, unless of course you borrowed the money in the first place, but yeah. We look at life insurance. The fella in my example with the $8 million. If you want to deal with your issues, well, you say, you know what? Why don't I just buy a $500,000 life insurance policy, put it in my drawer, and that'll go to the IRS, and we'll call it a day. That's possible. And then there's the marital credit. This is an entire session onto its own, but there is a deferral, transferring property over to the spouse. There is limitations for Canadians, so you could still end up having to pay tax depending upon how the numbers work. Or you can go through what they call in the States a QDOT, which is a qualifying domestic trust, to transfer it entirely over to the wife onto the second death. And there's other planning as well.
Qualifying what?
Qualifying domestic trust. I forgot what the O is.
No, domestic.
Eh? Domestic? Oh, that's it? Oh, okay. Qualifying domestic trust, it's usually for a spouse. It could be contained in your will. And this becomes something, if there's a lot of wealth in the family and there's a lot of value in the States, it's something that we start looking at seriously. Okay, trusts. We're going to talk about two types of trusts, and I think I might have to speed up too, otherwise you'll be here for noon. A bear trust, it's a Canadian entity. Bear trust is basically, in French here, it's a prête-nom, it's an agent. It's not really a separate being, it's just going to act on behalf of you. The niceness of a bear trust is I can cancel it whenever. I'm still subject to U.S. estate tax because the IRS is going to look through the trust and it's going to see that I and my wife own the property. But what it does do is avoids probate because the trust does not die. So the trust is on record as who owns the property. It'll be the Nick Moraitis Revocable Living Trust. Well, trusts don't die. So if something happens to me, I pass away, or even better, which I didn't mention in the first slide, I get sick. I can't fly to Florida to take care of anything. I can't transact in the States. Well, then what happens to the house? I can't get financing. I can't sell if I can't go down there and sign. Well, a trust can, because there's always a replacement, and it continues on. And this is something not that expensive, not that difficult to do, that is worthwhile for that probate issue. And for handling some of the liability issues in the States, or God forbid there's marital issues, especially if your kids are there and they get married and you want to sort of protect that situation. So that's a bear trust. The other type of trust, however, a Canadian discretionary trust, that is used for both probate and U.S. estate tax. Now this one usually brings in the family. You can define who the beneficiaries are. Those who are the beneficiaries are the ones who get to enjoy the condo. It's usually done before the purchase or the offer. And the example that we've done here is where the person who's funding it, in this case it was a father, basically settled the trust with the money and then walked away. He has nothing to do with the trust, and I'm not in the camera. He has nothing to do with the trust. He basically settled it. And the reason he's walking away is we don't want the IRS to look through and say, you started the trust, You're the trustee who manages the trust. You get to enjoy the fruits of the condo. You know what? It's your estate, and therefore we're going to tax you again. So he walks away. He's nowhere on there, and he wasn't. The trustees were other family members and external people, because it is a Canadian discretionary trust. The beneficiaries were all the other members of the family except Dad. And basically, Dad got to go to the condo because the wife happened to invite him. And that's usually some of the thinking. This is very good for the probate and the estate. What gets the teeth gnawing is that loss of control. You're not in control of this trust. You walked away from that trust. You funded it, and you're going to get to go there, but you're not in charge. And in Canada, we have a simple little thing called the 21-year rule, where in 21 years' time, Canada is going to want its tax money on the value of this property. So that does become a problem if we're looking long term. So it's a solution that it's useful, but the 21 years can cause an issue. And we haven't yet seen the 21 years kick in. I haven't seen one in the Florida situation. We've seen them in other situations, but not in the U.S. real estate. And usually what that means is then we're back to the other examples of personal ownership, because it basically means we have to remove it from the trust and transfer title to somebody else. That's what it means. Good? Too much? This I'm not going to talk about too much. Canadian limited partnerships. Depending upon what I read and who I talk to, it may or may not get rid of U.S. estate tax. I haven't gotten 100%, except when we've got a file later on where we're talking millions of dollars at play. No one was willing to bet on the limited partnership would protect your U.S. estate tax. This could be a lot more useful for rental properties, and we have an example of that. I wouldn't look at that necessarily for, unless you really want to, unless it's, again, a lot of wealth and you're buying something very expensive. Canadian corporations, this used to be what we used to do about 2005 and before. Canadian Corp, set up a little Canadian Corp, fund it, have it buy the property, no U.S. estate tax, no probate, and you go on merrily with it so long as you were funding everything. Canada woke up one day and said, you know what, we don't like that anymore. We're going to tax you if you do. So it doesn't mean we don't do it, because you'll see an example, we do it, but now there's a tax hit to it. The other disadvantage, when you do sell a property, because Shant promised me it's going to double in 10 years, I'm looking at a 35% tax rate in the States rather than the 15% that I would get if I owned it personally, because the rates are different. And Florida will now tax me as well, whereas if I owned it in my name, Florida doesn't tax me. So now I'm at 40% compared to 15% in the States, and here in Canada we're at 24%. So I'm paying a lot more tax when I go ahead and sell it. However, we have an example where the cash is coming from your company, if you're a businessman, and that's where your cash is, and you don't have it in your name. It's something that we do look at. U.S. corporations, it avoids probate, but I haven't seen yet a U.S., and it's a C Corp that we use, to own a condo for oneself. It could be used for purposes of rental activities. The thing is, though, if we do have a U.S. corporation, it is never me who owns the U.S. corporation. It will be my company that owns U.S. corporation, because shares of a U.S. corporation are subject to U.S. estate tax. So if I use this, I'm into other issues. But we will look at a U.S. C Corp if it's rental activities, or if you're doing a much more substantial real estate investment in the States, but not necessarily for owning a home. LLC, you are going to be inundated with people telling you you gotta get a ULC. How many do you own?
I own 3, but because I'm...
Yeah, LLCs are fantastic for Americans. They could be very harmful for Canadians. We don't suggest it. There could be structures using a limited liability company, but we don't. If you do hear about it, because you are going to hear about it if you're looking seriously at the States, because a lot of Americans own their stuff through LLCs. So they're saying, well, why can't you? Well, I can't because Canada is going to tax me twice. Okay? That's the different methods, and that's the stuff we look at, and that's why neither one of these is ideal. And then really it's a sit down and talking with you as to what's happening, etc. Then we get into reporting, and the reporting is really just so that you know, if you just own a condo and you're just using it for yourself, there's really not too much to do with telling IRS anything. So the day-to-day going there, that's okay. There's not anything either for Canada. You don't have to tell them. That's cool. If you are low earning rental income, the U.S. goes first. They get first crack at your rental income. Canada comes second. And that's the way the treaty works. And there's special elections because otherwise you'd be paying a flat 30% rate. Otherwise, that's where you need a U.S. accountant. U.S. tax numbers, there's something called an individual tax identification number, ITIN, that you would be needing to get at some point in time. Buying the condo, you don't need it, but if you want to sell the condo, you should get one because you're going to be looking to file a U.S. tax return. And obviously, if your corporations or partnerships, you're getting something called an employer ID number. So this is the paperwork that has to get done. Selling your property, whether it's a rental, or whether it's your condo or a house, the capital gain is taxed in the U.S. because we're going to get capital gains, Shant told me. And it's subject to tax, the U.S. goes first. And they're going to charge you, either they're 15% because you own it in your name, or they're looking to charge you the 35% if you have it in a company, and then Florida kicks in another 5.5%. And that's what they're looking to do. Canada's comes second. So if you're an individual, Canada wants 24%, but they'll credit you the 15% you pay to the States. So you'll pay an extra, quickly the math, 9% over to Canada. If it's in a corporate, it doesn't necessarily work. The other thing to know about, however, if you own a property that you're selling for $300,000 and more, you're subject to a 10% withholding tax, which they call a FRPTA, and I do not know what that is. It's foreign something or other. But it is a withholding tax. It's just a payment on account that you will then try to get back. Or like we're doing one now where we're looking at a property that we're just at $298,000 and it's being bought by a buyer to use at home. I get away from this 10% withholding. So that's some stuff, yeah.
So you are always subject to the capital gains tax if you have a capital gain.
Period.
You may be subject or not to the withholding tax.
Yeah, this would be how you would pay it. So if I'm selling my property because Shant was wrong and I don't make a big buck and I'm only selling it for $250,000, I don't have to pay this 10%, but I still owe capital gains tax, and I have to file a tax return. And don't ask me what if I don't, how they're going to find me. I can't respond because maybe they won't. But if it's worth more than $300,000, they will take their 10%, and then you file your tax return and pay what you should have paid and get back a refund, which is usually what happens. Okay. Now, again, I'm telling you stuff that this is what ought to happen. I have received questions in the past where it said, well, what if I don't do this? What happens? Prison food, maybe. Canada is going to tax you on everything. Canada's not let you going to get away with anything. Rental income is taxable here. The capital gain is taxable here, except there's foreign tax credits for what you pay in the States, because that's our deal with the States. So you should be always looking to pay the highest rate of tax between the two countries, but your checks are going to two countries. That's how it usually works. And and if you do pay U.S. estate tax, or if your estate is paying U.S. estate tax, our treaty does allow some recovery against our Canadian income taxes. Quebec doesn't. So Quebec is going to want its taxes without any, you're going to pay the U.S. estate tax and you're paying Quebec. Chances are the numbers that we've seen most cases, you're also paying Canada because it's just the way the calculations work. Examples. I have 5 examples and we're almost done. Here's a couple that was worth way more than the $8 million buying a property worth way more than $1 million. And when we sat down and we did the same presentation except it didn't have PowerPoint. And we went through all the calculations and decisions and they all listened to me. They were very, very polite. And at the end of the day, they said, we're buying it jointly, 50-50. They each had their own money, but that's it. We're keeping it simple. I said, what about the bare trust? Yeah, that's a good idea, but as of 5 years later, they still haven't done the trust. Because you can do that at any time. It's not, you're just doing, it's a mirage. So they kept it simple, and at the end of the day, their analysis was, okay, so I'm going to lose, I think we were talking about $750,000 in estate tax back then. So the kids are going to have maybe $1 million less. It didn't seem to unnerve them too much. They wanted it simple because they did not like getting our bills. So that's what they did. Husband and wife, 50-50, joint ownership in common, and they walked away. This gentleman wanted, after many years of looking at condos, and finally the prices, I guess, came down, wanted to buy a property. His cash was in a company. And we talked about it, okay, fine. Let's talk personal, lower, you get that 15% lower capital gain rate. And I hadn't spoken to Shant by then, so I didn't know what the prices were going to double. But I said, but wait a second, if you're going to need $1 million personal, you have to take out $1,570,000 from your company. send a check of $570,000 to both governments, because basically it's a dividend, get the $1 million net, and go buy a condo. That's when the conversation sort of went. He says, no, you don't understand. My check is $1 million. So we back and forth, and this is not something we did on our own. We did have legal counsel who also specializes in this. We went through all the analysis, and at the end of the day, we're buying it through the holding company, because that's what he insisted. Yes, there should be a taxable benefit that has to be calculated. It just so happens the benefit now is one of the calculations is 1% of that value of the condo, but it's an interest rate that fluctuates and moves up and down. Now it's low, it's only 1%. He did avoid his probate and his estate tax. He did avoid this, and unfortunately in the future, I think he bought it in Florida, he'd be looking, I said, put a 35% capital gain rate in state versus right now it's 23 in the corporations in Canada. These rates obviously can change. There's discussions going on in the States. Maybe they should reduce the corporate level tax, but he couldn't get past this. And that's what we ended up doing. Is it the best? Long term, we will find out. So when he sells it in 10, 20 years, I can go do back the math and say, where would you have been? And that's the only way we're ever going to find out. Discretionary Canadian trust. Here was a father who was not in very good health, and there was a discussion again with other advisors. There was an estate tax issue, and basically we figured maybe we should get rid of the condo. And this happened, he passed away in 2011, so he did this last year. He gifted cash to the trust. He created a Canadian discretionary trust. He was not trustee, he was not beneficiary, but it didn't matter really, unfortunately. He knew that this wasn't long for him. Trust took the cash, bought the condo off of him. The condo value had fallen, so he wasn't facing a significant capital gain. So for him, the taxes were nominal compared to his estate tax had he kept it. It's a discretionary trust. All the kids were members, and some of the kids with an independent trustee, because it's in Quebec, is the what am I saying, trustees. And he was completely gone. As I said, he was a guest of his spouse for the time that he was alive, and he passed away in 2011. But we escaped estate tax, and we paid a couple of bucks in capital gains. So this is something that we did do using that discretionary Canadian trust that we had. Now into the business elements. Two brothers, and this had conversations. I think we were the third option. There was U.S. counsel. There was people even from Toronto, because everybody obviously in Toronto knows more than us. A whole bunch of people looked at this, and here is two brothers owning several rental properties. The state tax exposure was, I think, $7 million per brother, so there's two of them. They owned it themselves. They bought it in 1950s, 60s. They were running businesses, motels, hotels, rental properties, etc. It was a simple structure. Why bother me? They paid their taxes in the States, paid it into Canada. Why bother them with a whole bunch of stuff until we come up and say, yeah, but you're now in your 70s. I mean, I'm just a guess. I mean, the $7 million starts becoming a little bit more closer than when you were in your 30s. And we went through everything and even more other structures. At the end of the day, we're saying, let's look at a corporate ownership. We started off with a partnership structure. That's what we wanted to do. But again, that's when no one was willing to sign off and guarantee that this wouldn't get paid. So when no one was willing to sign off, I figured, okay, so we went into corporate. We were also going to do other things from a Canadian estate fees perspective, but it meant you have to today pay $2.5 million in taxes to do this. Well, we're still talking. They sort of are stuck here. Now this has come down, because thanks to what's happened over the years in Florida. So this has come down. This has come down as well, but the gap is a lot more shorter. So now everybody's backed off. They don't want to cut this check, so we're still talking. And this has gone around the whole country in terms of how do we solve this issue, and the brothers are getting older. And the last example I have, this happened earlier this year. There was, I guess, an investment group from the States that brought a project up here, got investors here in Montreal. Two limited partnerships, one a U.S., one a Canadian, into this the whole apartment blocks structure, taking advantage. Everybody was owning it individual, so that when they sell it, they get that 15% tax rate in the States. And I think the extra layer was to mitigate U.S. estate tax, because the Canadian limited partnership owning another limited partnership you're not, there was some consensus that that would probably be a little bit more of a stopgap. And again, at the time, the investments we're talking about between $100,000 to $500,000 in terms of investment. But this is a structure as well that is in place right now that closed in February or March of 2011. Again, depending on what you want to do. So I'm done. Again, no perfect way. You saw the various options and the pros and cons, and it's really a personal sit down and chit chat and figure out what your tolerance is for taxes and fees. And that's about it. Questions? I've been so clear that you know exactly what